There are some people who spend their entire lives convinced that death is the end. No heaven, no hell, no divine judgment, just eternal darkness. He was one of them. For 40 years, this farmer mocked everyone who spoke of God, laughed at those who prayed, and built walls around his heart that seemed unbreakable. He believed only in what he could see and touch. But on one ordinary autumn morning, beneath the weight of a rolling tractor, as his life drained into the dirt of his own field, something impossible happened. What he experienced in those moments between life and death shattered everything he thought he knew. He went somewhere. He saw someone. And when he came back, he was no longer the same man. This is his story, a journey from absolute disbelief to an encounter so powerful it changed him forever. What happens when a man who believes in nothing comes face to face with everything? You're about to find out. October 14th began like any other day. Coffee at dawn, boots laced tight. The morning fog rolling across fields he'd walked 1,000 times before. He fired up the old tractor, that familiar diesel growl, the vibration through the steel seat. Nothing felt different. Nothing felt wrong. He had no idea he was living his last moments as the man he'd always been. The back ridge needed clearing before winter set in. Steep terrain, but he'd done it countless times. As the tractor climbed the incline, he noticed the ground looked softer than usual. Last night's rain had soaked deep. He should have stopped, should have waited. But men like him don't wait. They push forward. They control their world. Or so he thought. The earth betrayed him without warning. 1 second, solid ground. The next, the right wheel sinking into mud that wasn't there before. The tractor tilted. Slowly at first, almost gracefully. Then gravity took over with brutal finality. He grabbed for the steering wheel, but his hands found only air. The world rotated in sick, slow motion. Sky, ground, then impact, metal screaming, glass shattering, and his body pinned beneath 3 tons of machinery. The pain arrived in waves. First his chest ribs collapsing inward like a crushed birdcage. Then his lungs, unable to expand, desperate for air that wouldn't come. He tried to scream but produced only a wet, gurgling sound. Blood filled his mouth, copper and hot. His vision narrowed to a tunnel. The bright October sky above him dimmed to twilight, then to dusk, then to something darker than any night he'd ever known. He thought about his wife finding him, about dying alone in the dirt like an animal, about the nothingness he'd always believed was waiting. And in that final second of consciousness, as the darkness swallowed him completely, one thought pierced through the terror. What if I was wrong? Then his heart stopped beating. Death wasn't what he expected. There was no fade to black, no peaceful sleep, no nothingness. Instead, something shifted. A separation he couldn't explain, like being unzipped from his own skin. The pain vanished instantly, replaced by a lightness so profound it felt like he'd been carrying boulders his entire life without knowing it. He was rising. Not climbing, not flying, simply ascending as naturally as smoke from a fire. And below him, growing smaller with each passing second, he saw it. His body, twisted beneath the tractor, one arm bent at an impossible angle, blood spreading like dark wings across the soil. It looked so small, so fragile, so utterly not him anymore. The strangest part? He felt no attachment to it. That broken thing down there was just a shell, a vehicle he'd driven for 40 years and had now abandoned on the side of the road. He wanted to feel horror, wanted to feel something, but all he experienced was curiosity and a peace so complete it bordered on euphoria. He continued upward, passing through the roof of clouds without resistance. His farm shrank to the size of a postage stamp. He could see his house, his wife's car in the driveway. She had no idea yet that everything had changed. The entire county spread below him like a map. Then the state, then the curve of the earth itself became visible. And then he passed through something else, a boundary. A membrane between worlds, so thin he's lived his entire life pressed against it without ever knowing it existed. The physical universe disappeared completely, and he found himself suspended in a void. But this wasn't emptiness. This darkness pulsed with presence, with consciousness, with a knowing that watched him. He wasn't alone. He'd never been alone. And whatever waited in this darkness was about to reveal itself. It appeared without warning, a single point of brilliance in the infinite dark, no larger than a pinprick. But even from this impossible distance, he felt its pull, not physical. Deeper than that, it called to something essential within him, something he'd ignored his whole life. The light wasn't just illuminating the darkness, it was drowning it, consuming it, transforming it into something else entirely. He moved toward it, or it moved toward him. The distinction had ceased to matter. As he approached, the point expanded into an opening, then a passage, then a tunnel of pure radiance that defied every law of physics he'd ever known. This wasn't light reflecting off surfaces. This was light as a living substance, warm and tangible, wrapping around him like liquid love. The acceleration began. Faster and faster, though speed itself became meaningless. And as he traveled, his life began to play before him, not as memories, but as lived experiences happening again in real time. His 5th birthday. His first kiss. The moment he held his daughter for the first time. Every joy preserved in perfect detail. But then came the rest. The neighbor he'd mocked for praying over a sick child. The Sunday school teacher he'd humiliated at the hardware store. His son asking about God, and his own voice, cold and dismissive. Only fools believe in fairy tales. Each moment hit him with devastating clarity, and he felt not just his own emotions, but there's the hurt he'd caused, the hope he'd crushed, the loneliness he'd inflicted with his contempt. Shame flooded through him like poison. He wanted to stop, to turn back, to hide in the darkness where at least he couldn't see what he'd become. But the light wouldn't release him. It pulled him forward with relentless mercy, and he understood with growing terror that something waited at the end of this tunnel. Something that knew everything, something he'd denied existed for 40 years. And he was about to meet it face to face. The tunnel opened into a realm that shouldn't exist. Light everywhere, but not the kind that blinds. This illuminated everything, including the darkest corners of his soul. And standing in the center of this impossible radiance was a figure. A man. But calling him just a man was like calling the ocean just water. He knew immediately. Not through logic or deduction, but through recognition that bypassed his mind entirely and struck directly at his core. Jesus. The name he'd spoken only in mockery for decades now burned through him like fire. This wasn't a painting, wasn't a statue, wasn't the sanitized Sunday school version. This was power wrapped in human form. Love so fierce it could unmake galaxies. And eyes that held the weight of every suffering soul throughout all of time. Those eyes turned toward him, and he felt himself being seen, truly seen, for the first time in his existence. Every secret thought, every hidden cruelty, every moment of pride that had built a fortress around his heart. Nothing was hidden. Nothing could be hidden. He stood naked before infinite truth, and the shame was so overwhelming he wanted to cease existing. But then Jesus spoke. And the voice wasn't sound, it was presence, emanating from everywhere and nowhere, bypassing his ears and resonating directly within his being. Why did you turn away from me? I was in every sunrise you refused to thank me for. In every person who tried to show you love. In every moment of grace you attributed to chance. I knocked, and you barricaded the door. I called, and you covered your ears. I waited, and you laughed. The words weren't accusations, they were grief. Divine sorrow over a lost sheep who'd spent 40 years running from the shepherd. And that grief hurt worse than any condemnation could have. He wanted to defend himself, to explain, to justify his disbelief. But what defense exists before absolute truth? What excuse holds weight before the one who created weight itself? He fell, not physically, there was no physical here, but his entire being collapsed inward. And for the first time in his life, he wept with complete honesty. Jesus extended his hand. And suddenly the farmer was no longer standing in the light, he was inside his memories, living them again with terrifying new perspective. But this time he wasn't alone in his own skin. He experienced everything from every angle, felt everything from every heart. There was his wife on their wedding night, whispering prayers of gratitude while he slept, thanking God for bringing them together. He felt her hope then, her pure joy, and then he felt it shatter year after year as he mocked what she held most sacred. He experienced her loneliness, the silent tears she cried in the bathroom, the desperate prayers she whispered for his soul while he watched television in the next room, completely oblivious to her pain. His daughter appeared next, 12 years old, standing in her Sunday dress. She'd wanted to be baptized, and he'd forbidden it, called it brainwashing, said she could make that decision when she was old enough to think for herself. He felt her confusion, the shame that burned through her when her friends asked why her father wouldn't come to church. He felt the seed of doubt he'd planted in her heart, the way she began to hide her faith like something shameful, the slow erosion of her confidence in what she believed. Then came the neighbors, the co-workers, the cashier at the grocery store who Dee once said, God bless you, and received his contempt in return. He felt every wince, every hurt, every moment of discouragement his words had caused. People who'd been trying to share hope, and he crushed it like insects under his boot. But then something unexpected emerged. The stranger with the flat tire, he felt that man's gratitude, the way that simple act of kindness had restored his faith in humanity during a dark season. The bonuses he'd given his workers, he felt their relief. The bills they could finally pay, the dignity restored. Small moments he'd written off as nothing were, revealed as drops of divine love flowing through him despite his disbelief. Jesus spoke again. Even in your darkness, my light tried to shine through. Imagine what you could have been if you'd surrendered to it completely. The review ended, and he found himself once again before Jesus, but something had shifted. The light seemed softer now, less overwhelming, as if adjusting to his transformed state. He expected judgment, sentencing, the final verdict on a wasted life. Instead, Jesus spoke words that shattered him in an entirely different way. You must return. Return. The word hit him like a physical blow. Back to that broken body? Back to pain and limitation and the crushing weight of physical existence? After experiencing this, after touching infinity, after understanding love in its purest form, how could he possibly go back to the prison of flesh and bone? Please, he heard himself beg, and the desperation in his voice was absolute. Let me stay here. I understand now. I believe. I'll do anything, be anything you want, but don't send me back to that. He gestured toward the veil between worlds, beyond which his ruined body lay cooling in the October dirt. There's nothing for me there anymore. I wasted it. I destroyed it. Let me stay where I finally understand. But Jesus shook his head, and the movement carried the weight of cosmic necessity. Your time has not come. You were brought here not as an ending, but as a beginning. Few are given this gift to see beyond the veil and return with the memory intact. You have been chosen for a purpose. The words should have been an honor, but they felt like a sentence. Chosen for what? He asked, though part of him already knew the answer. To be a witness. To tell the ones who doubt, who suffer, who have surrendered to despair. Tell them I am real. Tell them death is not the end. Tell them that no amount of disbelief can exhaust my patience. No depth of denial can place them beyond my reach. You lived 40 years in darkness, and in one moment you were transformed. If I can reach you, I can reach anyone. He felt the pull then, a magnetic force drawing him backward, away from the light. Panic seized him. I'm not worthy, he cried. I denied you my entire life. Who will believe someone like me? Jesus' final words followed him as he began to fade. That is exactly why they will listen. The return was violence incarnate. One moment suspended in infinite peace, the next slammed back into flesh with the force of a train collision. His chest exploded with pain as his lungs attempted their first breath in what felt like eternity. Ribs ground against each other, broken edges scraping. Blood rushed back into oxygen-starved tissue, bringing with it a burning sensation that spread through every nerve ending. He screamed a raw animal sound that tore from his throat before consciousness fully returned. The weight of the tractor pressed down on him, the smell of diesel and earth and his own blood filling his nostrils. The October sky above looked impossibly dull compared to the radiance he'd just left. Everything felt heavy, dense, limited. He was back in the prison of mortality, and the contrast was almost unbearable. His wife found him 17 minutes later. The doctors would later call it impossible. The damage to his body should have killed him 3 times over. Crushed ribs, collapsed lung, internal bleeding. His heart had stopped for nearly 4 minutes according to the coroner's later estimation. Yet here he was, conscious, talking, telling anyone who would listen about what he'd seen. The hospital became his first pulpit. Nurses, doctors, other patients, he told them all about the tunnel, about the light, about standing before Jesus and experiencing a love so complete it made every earthly attachment feel like a shadow. Some thought the trauma had broken his mind. Others listened with tears streaming down their faces, especially those who'd lost loved ones and desperately needed to believe death wasn't the end. His wife sat beside his bed that first night, holding his hand with a grip that wouldn't release. I prayed for this every single day, she whispered. For 30 years, I prayed you would see what I saw. I just never imagined it would take this. He squeezed back, unable to find words adequate for the magnitude of what had changed. The man who'd mocked her faith was gone. In his place was someone who touched the very thing she'd always believed in. When he was finally strong enough to walk, his first destination wasn't his farm or his home. It was the small white church at the edge of town, the one he'd driven past with contempt for 40 years. He stood at the threshold, hand on the wooden door, and the simple act of entering felt more significant than anything he'd ever done. Inside, sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting the pews in colors that seemed almost alive after what he'd witnessed. The pastor looked up, recognition and shock crossing his face in equal measure. The farmer, the man who'd believed in nothing, who'd built his identity on skepticism and self-reliance, walked down that aisle with tears streaming openly down his weathered face. And for the first time in his entire existence, he knelt and prayed with complete surrender. Not because someone told him to, not because tradition demanded it, but because he'd been to the other side and returned with a truth carved into his very soul. Jesus is real. Death is not the end, and love is the only thing that survives the crossing between worlds. Some transformations happen gradually over years. His happened in the space between heartbeats. And nothing would ever be the same again. This story raises questions that perhaps you've asked yourself. What really happens when we die? Is there something beyond this physical existence? His transformation wasn't gradual, it was instant, overwhelming, and absolutely real to him. If this story impacted you, if it made you think about your own beliefs or gave you hope about what lies beyond, I need you to do something right now. Hit that subscribe button because this channel is dedicated to sharing these profound, near-death experiences that challenge everything we think we know about life and death. These aren't just stories. They're testimonies from people who've crossed the threshold and returned changed forever. Leave a like on this video if this farmer's journey moved you, and drop a comment below telling me, have you ever questioned what happens after death? Has anyone you know had an experience like this? I read every single comment, and your stories matter. And here's the thing, this farmer's experience is just one of hundreds. There's the surgeon who met his deceased daughter in heaven. Click on the next video to hear another account that will challenge everything you believe. These experiences are real, they're documented, and they're waiting for you to discover them.